Welcome back to How Good Were They, the podcast where we go back and look at some of the game's greatest stars and ask the question, how good were they? This time we're not looking at a player, we're looking at a team, the famous or infamous side, Brazil 1982, a side that many believe were the most beautiful of all time, to have played the best football of all time, but ultimately flawed. Thoughts?
It's a great story. It's one of social media's favourite teams, I think, isn't it? It's one of those ones that, our Twitter at TFHBS, check us out. Every time you put out a tweet about 1982, that Brazil side, it goes wild, isn't it? It's one of people's favourite ever teams.
Yeah.
And so we thought, let's have a look. Were they actually that good?
Yeah, now we obviously didn't see them play because we weren't born until 11 years later.
Yeah.
But we often hear about them. I know our parents and so on have lots to say about them. I know people have written books about this side. A really good team. So, coached by Telê Santana, of course, 1982 World Cup is one of their most famous. Brazil have qualified for all the World Cups, but this one, a lot of people, other than 1970, probably believe it to be their best team. Unlike 1970, though, they do crash out.
Yeah.
Ultimately, they crash out in that famous game, Italy 3-2, the Paolo Rossi hat-trick. People think it's one of the greatest World Cup games of all time, in probably the greatest World Cup of all time. You watch it back, the John Motson commentary is amazing. Brazil tipped to win in a heat. I think it was played in Barcelona in an older stadium that used to be there. Boiling hot day, you see the players covered in sweat all over. The yellow Brazilian top is going like an orange colour by the end. Despite them scoring a couple of equalisers, Rossi ultimately wins it. Rossi, that was controversial in the World Cup because many believed he shouldn't have been there for his role in the Tottenero scandal. But ultimately they win, and people believe that is the day football died. That's what they say about it. Who were the main players in the team?
Well, I'm wearing one of them right here. Sócrates, Dr. Sócrates, as we called it.
Very cool.
Very cool. Play with the headband. One of people's sort of favourites. I think he's on FIFA now, or certainly whatever they call it, as an icon. So he's a bit more well known. I was wearing this out, and a sort of teenager said, "Oh, Socrates." So I was like, "Flipping out! You either know your football history
or Greek philosophy,
or your Greek philosophy." Yeah. Zico.
Yeah, I mean, what player he was. Yeah. Free kick superstar, Flamengo player. Yeah. He was absolutely amazing. His goal record from attacking mid was pretty sensational.
Yeah.
I think those two are the main players you think about, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're the two on the picture of this podcast celebrate with each other. There's also other players as well, Éder as well. He scored some fantastic goals in this World Cup.
Not the one who scored the winner in 2016.
But he was a fantastic player. He scored, I think the goal against the Soviet Union in the first game. Right at the end, he flicks it up and then sort of outside the boot, Travellas it in. Outstanding player. Really set the toe. So I think their forward line was generally pretty special.
Yeah.
And I think when we look closer at the team later on, it's that defensive area where they were ultimately perhaps flawed, and maybe the lack of a true number 9 as well. So let's go through the team from start to finish. So we have Perez in goal, Leandro in defence, Oscar, Zinho, Junior, Cerezo, Zico, Sócrates, Falcão, Éder, and Serginho. Not the AC Man Serginho of the early 2000s. Falcão, another player as well.
Not Radamel.
Yeah, not him. So lots of players in his team with similar names. Oscar and Junior, quite a few there. Record though, so they beat Soviet Union in the first game.
Yeah.
Then went on to smash Scotland, as often happens in the World Cup. Sorry, Scotland. Smashed them 4-1. Then they went and beat New Zealand. Maybe not so difficult. 4-0. Then they beat Argentina, the reigning champions Argentina, in the second group phase, because there was 2 groups in this World Cup, 3-1, comfortable victory. So you're thinking after that, perhaps this Brazilian side are going to go on and win it all, and then comes the match against Italy, where most believe Brazil are going to go through, but obviously Italy win, and then they go on to win.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those great moments in football that obviously we remember great winners, but so often in previous videos, in previous podcasts, we've talked about the nearly men and those who come so close and don't do it. And football is made up of so many of them. When we think of Netherlands sides, when we think of, for us, 1954 and Hungary and how close they come. And this is another
Wales against Belgium the other day.
Yeah.
So close to the comeback.
Yeah.
I think they are in that kind of trinity of the nearly men of World Cups, aren't they? Like those other two though, they didn't reach the final. They went out a bit earlier on, second group phase. They didn't really get the semi. So, but they are in that nearly men. A lot of people say they're the best team to never win the World Cup. 15 goals then in 5 games, pretty impressive. And most believe them to be the true epitome of Joga Benito.
Yes,
sort of play beautiful, bringing that carnival sort of samba atmosphere onto the pitch. And you watch the footage back, even in that Italy game when they lose, some of the football they play, that the Sócrates goal in particular, sort of interplay with Zico is so good, and something that it wouldn't look out of place today. Which I think is one of the biggest compliments you can make.
Yes, it is. It is particularly for people who will say football was easier back then, or football was, anyone could do it back then, sort of thing. This side were one of those that you could perhaps transpose if you get modern fitness, modern technology into a modern team, and they do a good job at it. And I think it's because Brazil, for British people and for world football, have such like a love affair with the World Cup as well, isn't it? Brazil, when you think of the World Cup, one of the first sides I think of Brazil.
Yeah, they
are the World Cup.
They're usually one of the first qualified. Like South America often does it first, don't they?
Yeah.
100%. Brazil side absolutely ridiculously good. And as we'll see later on, that style of play, is probably gone now from Liverpool. You don't really see it anymore. And I think often we look back at World Cup 2002 with rose-tinted glasses, and we see these names that played. They didn't play the same kind of football.
Yeah.
So I think that.
Yeah, well, that chant, the football chant, it's just like watching Brazil. Sort of comes from teams like this of that size.
Yes,
I wonder if it is. Probably was around that time of and you still hear it, isn't it? You still say it, or you see a talented youngster or a kid or something, like he's playing like a Brazilian, things like that. Yeah, and it's that, isn't it? It's everything. It's always that Brazilian image in your mind, and this team sort of epitomised that.
Absolutely. So, if you haven't listened to this podcast before, I like to throw 3 curveballs throughout to maybe question the legacy or the greatness of these sides. So far, we looked at Maldini and Van Basten. We discussed how Maldini, didn't do it at an international level, and Van Basten retired maybe too early because of his injuries. But ultimately, we still put them as great.
Yeah.
This side, then, should we get into the curveballs?
Let's have a look.
Okay, curveball number 1 is quite obvious. They didn't win the World Cup. Thoughts?
Well, when we're talking about how good were they, they weren't good enough to win that World Cup. It's really tricky, isn't it? Because there's only been, 24 editions of the FIFA World Cup, 24 winners. Brazil have won that 5 times now, and you'll remember those great sides, 58, 58, 62, 70, 94, and 2002. There it is. There you go. Now, we talk about, was that 94 side as good as the 82 side? Possibly not. But that 94 side got over the line.
But they won it.
They got over the line, yeah. And so, I think that's absolutely fair criticism you could level at them. I suppose if you put it into maybe a Premier League terms and you sort of go into the side that came third were the best team that season, they weren't. They didn't win the league out there. And they, at that summer tournament, whilst they mesmerised people for 5 games, they only managed to do it for 5 games and no more. So I think it is a fair criticism because many people will say, we've talked about it with individuals, have they won that World Cup? Does that make them a great if they win a World Cup?
But what's interesting, though, isn't it, is when you win a World Cup, you're obviously going to be remembered as a team, as a famous team, because you won the World Cup. Does it maybe say more if you're remembered for not winning it?
Yeah.
Because you have to do more to be remembered, because it's easy to be remembered for winning it, because you won it. You're always going to be remembered as they won it in this year. If you're a team like Hungary, Netherlands, Brazil 82, maybe that adds a bit more to your sort of, I don't know the words, but it adds a bit more to it, the whole myth and the legacy of your side, doesn't it?
And I think those 3 teams in particular roll off the tongue a little bit there, where sometimes you can forget a winner. You can forget the years that the side won it, and some of those sides.
You struggled.
Well, I did, some of those sides that are less memorable. In World Cups that were less memorable, this is a very memorable World Cup. I wonder if there's an element of this was, a time of TV explosion as well in terms of football on telly, far more.
So John Motz's commentary.
Yeah, exactly. Iconic moments. Football in the UK was in a really, really negative state.
Yeah, you know what? That's a really good point, actually. And I think a lot of the people that we hear from, actually, are British based. They saw it in '82. when, maybe when they're watching football on the terraces in England, they were probably seeing, aside from the decent football, they were seeing, scary scenes in the crowd. And maybe that makes a difference.
There's an element of the joy of football was lost in the UK, and maybe
they were seeing it. Nice.
Do that Brazilian lens.
Yeah. All right. Cool. So the second curveball it's kind of linked to the first one, but we kind of touched upon this. They have been over romanticized into this myth that their style of play was so attractive, but ultimately, what does that really mean if you don't win anything?
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
I think football can over romanticize stuff, can't it? Definitely it can. It can always be the story of those Neely men. And every national team does it. Wales do it with 1958, 2016. If only
not. Yeah.
It's always that thing of, man, they were so good. They were the ones that missed out.
Yeah.
So I think there's probably an element of that, and obviously there is, and there's always in football is filled with nostalgia as well, isn't it? Of things were better back then.
Nostalgia's clouding the judgment, isn't it?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. But you do watch them on, YouTube. There's very accessible highlights of that side, and it is very good football. There's no denying that.
Yeah.
And perhaps more so because it was a time there wasn't. Other people would now say that the football we see today is boring, but they find that the mid 2000s football, the early noughties football that we grew to love in this this era, what we like to watch, what we grew up with, and then the Messi Ronaldo stuff, beautiful football as people call it then. It does translate. It does similar. It's it's nice to watch, and people like Sócrates were great characters too. And I think that's another big thing that you need in the side.
He played for Garforth Town, didn't he?
Yeah. He loved the game, and I think loved other things too, which ended his life perhaps earlier.
Has a lot of footballers from that era.
Yeah. And again, part of the story, isn't it? This guy who was in the '82 World Cup turned up for a very, very much non-league side in the UK. I definitely. I had a conversation in work about this side with people who remembered and they're like, "Oh, that side was amazing. That side was amazing straight away."
Fantastic. Right. The third curveball is they were victims of their era. So playing in the 1980s when, arguably pragmatic football was probably more likely than that principled game of Joe Gabinio.
Yeah.
And, Italy winning it, some people calling it Casaccio 2.0. Ultimately, they play a very intensive game, players like Scirea, Gentile. But ultimately, they still outscored Brazil in that game too. And Rossi is one of the best strikers of the era. But I think football in the 80s had kind of, I don't know, had regressed a little bit. We saw the 70s, the total football of the Dutch.
Yeah.
And I think the 80s comes along, and as we know about the off-the-field problems with hooliganism, not just in Britain, but, pretty much across the game. Yeah. I think that the football reflected the sort of societies that it was being played in. And that sort of, negative football, maybe we're the victim of it. Maybe they weren't pragmatic enough themselves to go and win it.
Yeah, it's another thing we've talked about with some great sides. Good football breeds ways to play against it, and often that is by shutting up shop and being very pragmatic, and why people like Mourinho had such success at a time where other sides that he was playing were playing what you deem as really lovely football. Sometimes it does win out, and that's why some of those Italian sides have been so successful at a club level and internationally, because they know how to grind out a result. And there is something about, certainly in a tournament, being able to get across the line. I think something that was levelled at the England side, which again I suppose didn't get over the line, but something certainly levelled at the Southgate England sides was they're too negative. But they did grind out results.
And they got to the finals.
Yeah.
The semi-finals, didn't they? Yeah, that's
and that was something unheard of for English teams. So they did grind out results. And I think maybe that is something that maybe that side lacked there, that if you focus, it's also like the total football thing of, we can outscore an opponent. Well, if you don't outscore the opponent, then you're in trouble.
You're
in trouble.
What's plan B?
Yeah.
Okay. So a few interesting curveballs there. I think they all link together, don't they? Really. Yeah. I think the defensive fragility, though, I think would be the main thing.
Yeah.
Why they didn't go any further. I think a lot of those players in defence for them the whole team was pretty attack minded.
Yeah. Even
the defence. And you watch the footage back of the game where they lose to Italy. Italy could have beaten them by more. Italy scored at the end, and it's disallowed for offside, even though he is miles onside, so it should have been 4-2. And the gaps that the Brazilians leave in their defence are huge. And, you watch the first goal, the cross from Caridi comes in, Rossi's unmarked 5 minutes in, heads it in, great header. Second goal, it's given away in midfield, like a hospital ball across square ball. Rossi picks it up, slams it past, and even that goal, he shoots it pretty much down the middle, and the keeper just goes through the keeper, so it's poor again. And the third goal, corner, scrappy, bobbles, and he flicks it in. So all three goals, you would look at that as a coach, and you'd be disappointed that they've scored any of those goals because they're all, it's all sloppy defending that has ultimately done it, which is the downfall. Brazil also, though, have chances at the other end. Serginho is the striker, and I think he wasn't the first choice striker. I think it's Careca. I think he was injured for the World Cup. Serginho comes in, and he's not great. He still scored, I think, maybe 2 in the group stage, but maybe like the 4th goal in each game. And he has a chance early in the first half to equalise, and he's about 10 yards out, 1-on-1, and he just rushes it and just kicks it wide, like bobbles on the floor. It's really poor. And you feel like if they had a Jaime, a Ronaldo here playing for them, even one of the players now, Gabriel Jesus, they probably would be winning those games, all the games. But another thought is, do you think they would have gone if they got through semi-finals? They played Poland, Bonnie X Poland. And they played West Germany in the final. Do you think they would have won those games?
Well, I mean, that Poland side was a good side, wasn't it? A very, very good side.
It was really good.
But had they got through there, it would have been really interesting. Final against West Germany. Mm-hmm. Obviously, like we said about Brazil, have a bit of a love affair with the World Cup. So did the West Germans. And perhaps people would have liked to see that as well. It's really hard to say, isn't it? And if a goal scorer was a problem, even though they scored a ton of goals still, they still scored enough. When they came up against those better sides like Poland, like West Germany, would it become a problem? Would the goals slightly dry up? I mean, they still scored 2 here, but I just think defensively that was clearly the problem, wasn't it? And perhaps that's just part of the Brazilian culture as well. We think of they've been on some heavy defeats too. We think of the 7-1 against Germany.
Oh my God, that game is
it's ridiculous. And they've had great. To think of Carlos and Cafu and people like that, but I think when we did a Brazilian draft on one of our earlier videos, centre backs aren't always the easiest thing to find for Brazil.
Not great, are they?
No,
Luciano's the opposite, but he was, I mean, for a few years world class, but he wasn't like he's never going to be in anyone's all-time 11.
They, like an Italian
bench or the second team, would he?
Very different, very, very different.
I don't think Lucio would be in the top 250 players of all time. Maybe he gets in there just about.
Yeah.
But I don't think he,
Yeah.
And he's probably their best one.
Yeah. And you can't think of any iconic Brazilian centre halves, and you can think of a few fullbacks, but often those fullbacks or wingbacks for what they did going forwards as well. Some of them. So
Carlos
Alberto, Carlos Alberto, and then and Roberto Carlos, the free kicks, and Cafu is one of the other ones that you think of as a quality one, but perhaps that is part of it. It's just not pragmatic enough, and they have been caught out in other World Cups doing that.
Right. Excellent. Let's look at what others said about Brazil. From others, we've found a few quotes here. Some from the actual game itself, the 8-2 Italy game. Others from people who would watch the team. So, first up, we have Johan Cruyff. He likened the 82 side to the side of 74. He believed they were... they're nearly like them. They played beautiful football like them. They were kind of the next replica of that side. Zico, he said about the football, he said when they were playing, they wanted to enjoy what they were doing, and that is why they played with that attacking flair.
That is Jogo Benito, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the most important thing for them before winning was just to enjoy themselves, which is nice.
Yeah.
I don't think that's what really works in a competitive sport, but we want to enjoy themselves first, play beautiful, do the Brazilian way, but just didn't work. And Paulo said that Brazil side wasn't from this planet. That's interesting. That's the opposition there.
Yeah.
Saying that the side he's playing against was out of this world.
Yeah,
but they beat them.
Yes, it's easy to say, isn't it, when you've beaten them? You can say whatever you want about them when you've beaten them.
It is.
Yeah.
Right, should we hear some quotes from our listeners?
Yeah, it's like we said, our Twitter at TFHBS, we put that out numerous times and said, what do you think of this side?
We were inundated
Yeah.
with replies. About 100, 150, 160 replies. So we'll try and go through a few of those now. These will be useful for us because these people would have actually seen this side play.
Yeah.
They'll really know what they were like.
Yeah.
So let's find out. So, Hugh Richards says, they're not as good as Italy when it mattered. And while Socrates may have been hugely gifted and the epitome of Brazilian cool, Andrew Downey's excellent biography shows him as an egotistical, self-destructive jerk.
Oof.
Oh, big words there. But you did mention that about his off-the-pitch life. Maybe that had an impact. Right, next one.
Yeah. Matt Leslie said, a world-class midfield. However, they had a suspect back four and a goalie who had a cart horse for a striker. 2 late strikes of genius got them off the hook versus USSR, who he says wrongly had a goal chalked off.
Justin.
And Italy had the manpower to stand up to them, which they did, which is what we said. Once they played a better team, that's where they started to struggle, perhaps.
Amos Parr says the football team equivalent of a fatally flawed hero. Attractive, bold, elegant and exciting, but they couldn't defend. They nearly lost to USSR, as we heard before. Scotland gave them a fright, and those goals Italy scored. There you go.
Enger LFC just says his favourite team in history.
Ooh. Yeah, John McNichol, one of the greatest teams to never win a World Cup, and that has 33 likes, so that's obviously a very popular comment there.
Ian Miller says I think about their skill and how great they were to watch, individually and collectively awesome. And then he's posted some of their highlights too, which you can, like we said, you can access.
Good look at those. Paul Blakemore says they made football mesmerising. He was 10. The skills, the talent, the freedom was joyous. Éder's goal against USSR is still his favourite ever goal. Although they didn't win it, Marco Tardelli's goal in celebration in the final cemented the Spain 82 World Cup as the best ever. So the best ever World Cup was this the best team not to win it. This is great.
Pat Don, that meme, if you're not watching us and just listening, that meme that of the horse that's really, really beautifully drawn at the back and then it's drawn by a child at the front. It's the opposite of this. Great up front, but awful at the back.
Fantastic. And Jim says he loved the 82 team. He loved that World Cup. They were great to watch. My favourite team of all time. If only there had been a better striker than Serginho up top. It was their World Cup to win. But despite not winning, us of that era who love football still love Brazil team of 82. And I think that's it, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're from that era. If that is, if you're born around 1970, that is the first World Cup you remember, the proper World Cup you remember. Yeah. And that team, and you saw it, because you probably would never see football like that before. That is, that makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That you're going to always believe them to be the best team ever.
Yeah, exactly. And, and there's one here from Boris, presumably not that one, saying that I'm old enough to have watched the Brazilian team in Mexico in 1970. They were the best international team you've seen, bar none. Well, obviously, they were who got across the line.
Yeah.
And so perhaps maybe that is the point, that they were a great team and they were great to watch. But perhaps they're not, as this is, maybe they weren't as good as we think they were in some ways.
Right, so let's go to our final bit then, when we decide once and for all, how good were they? So, first thing I'm going to ask you is, where would you rank this side in your all-time greatest international team?
Oh, wow.
We've done videos on this before on our YouTube channel, so check those out.
Yeah.
But we did kind of World Cup winners, didn't we? So where do we think this Brazil 82 side deserves to go? Are they a top 10 of all time? Are they top 20? Where do they go?
It's really tricky, isn't it? Like we said, we've had 24 winners of the FIFA World Cup. And you certainly probably would like to stick them above definitely some of those winners. 100%.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to carry across eras. I think they're not the greatest Brazilian team of all time. We've said that. There's 5 winners before them, and certainly 1970 would push them out of that spot.
I think 58.
And probably 58.
52 as well, yeah. Showing that, yeah.
And so, when we're considering them there, and they're probably a top 20, aren't they? Which is still decent for a side that didn't get to even the semi-finals.
Yeah.
To make it to the top 20. If you put them amongst the Neely men, where would you stick them there then? If you put them there against 74 Netherlands, 54 Hungary.
I think I'd have them third in those 3 Neely men. I think I'd have Netherlands 74 first. I think they are the epitome of the Neely men. I think it's that the total football.
Yeah.
the Dutch side, the coolness of the Cruyff.
Yeah.
I probably have Hungary quite close second now. I know we love Hungary, don't we?
Yeah.
But and their story is incredible for the whole. It was their only defeat in 6 years, which is just stupid.
Devastating.
But I think both of those sides, because they got to the final.
Yeah.
Well, Hungary were 2-0 up in that final,
Yeah.
I think, and Netherlands are 1-0 up in their final.
Yeah.
I think those two are more of an early men than a side that didn't get out of the second group stage.
Yeah, and they failed playing the best team they played. They couldn't beat them, and like we said, we have no idea what would have happened in the semi-final and the final. They may well have slipped up there as well. So I think they are a great team. I think they are one that people loved, and that can be different things as well. As certainly for me as a Cardiff fan, certainly some of the sides I've watched are not the greatest teams of all time. But they are certainly some of the most memorable and enjoyable to have watched. So the Dave Jones sides that never got promoted to the Premier League and should have were fantastic to watch at times. And I'm sure with you in Liverpool, some of the sides that have won things aren't the best you've watched, and haven't won things were better than that. And so that's just football, isn't it? Often, I suppose domestically there are lots of things you can win, but certainly internationally, really the biggest thing to win is a World Cup, and one side does that every 4 years, and so there's going to be a lot of good sides that don't quite make it in that way.
Okay, and the final question: would any of those players make your top 20 of all time?
I don't think so. No, I don't think top 20. I think Zico and Sócrates. Zico perhaps maybe more talented, Sócrates more memorable. Perhaps.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah, I think that's good.
Fantastic players. I don't know if they top 20.
I think Zico is close.
Cusp of it.
Yeah, I think he maybe
for some
around there.
Listeners, watchers would say yes.
Yeah, I'm not going to ask you to name 19 players.
No.
There we go then. Happy with that?
Yeah, I think so. Just make sure you check out wherever you're watching or listening. Give us a subscribe. Make sure you keep in touch.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also become a follower on the Spotify podcast as well. You can also follow us on TikTok at the Football History Boys and Instagram at the Football History Boys. We're on all the platforms.
Yeah, Twitter.
Just about.
Yeah. Give us a 5-star review if you want.
That'd be amazing. If you could leave a 5-star review here, that'd be fantastic. We've got a few.
Help us spread things out, isn't it? More people can listen to it. I think that the more you'll get. So it'd be lovely to get some reviews.
And comment who you'd like us to look at next. Is there a player or a team from history you think is overrated, or a team that you think needs to be fairly judged? We'll certainly give them a look.
For sure.
Fantastic. Right. Thank you so much for listening or watching if you're watching on YouTube. And we'll see you again for another one very soon.